In this video, we will go over how to solve a literal equation. So what is a literal equation? A literal equation is like a formula. There's many variables, and the variable that you choose to see as a variable depends on what you're looking for. So for example, I have I equals PRT. I is interest, P is principal, R is rate, and T is time. Which one you choose to see as a variable depends on whether or not you're trying to figure out how much interest, I, how much principal, how much money did we start with, P, what's our interest rate, R, or how much time did we leave our money in an account, T. And the same for the next formula, D equals RT, distance equals rate times time. If we want to know what the distance is, we would consider distance our variable because that's our unknown. So in that case, we would have to know what the rate and the time were so we could find the distance. However, if I knew the distance and knew my rate, I could figure out the time. In that case, time would be my variable. So it all kind of depends on what your unknown is. Even though there are many different variables, the one that is your unknown for your specific problem would be what we consider our variable. So we can solve these equations for variables other than what they're currently solved for. I equals PRT, I can solve for T by dividing both sides by PR. A equals pi r squared, I can solve by R by first dividing by pi and then taking the square root of each side. So here we are exactly solving for T, so we're going to divide by PR. So it all comes down to how do I get the T by itself? How do I isolate that? Now here's another formula that's similar. It also has to do with interest and rate. Here we're trying to solve for P, the principal. So basically, anything that isn't P, we need to get to the other side. This one is fairly simple. We divide by 1 plus RT. Now here we want to solve for x. We've got 3 times the quantity, 2x minus 5a, plus 4b equals 4x minus 2. Since we're being asked to solve for x is what we're considering our variable. So there's an a and a b in this question, but we're not considering those variables in the same way that x is. Notice that you have x on both sides of the equation. So what we need to do is gather up the x's and get everything else on the other side. First, we're going to get rid of the parentheses. Then we're going to get all the x's on the same side and all the non-x's on the opposite side. And now we can talk about isolating x. So x is equal to the quantity 15a minus 4b minus 2 all over 2. Here's another example. bx minus 2a equals a times x minus 3. We're solving for x still, so x is what we're considering our variable. Notice again, we have x on both sides of the equation. And since x is inside those parentheses, we need to distribute to get rid of the parentheses. Now we gather up the x's. And unlike the previous problem where we had a 6x minus a 4x, where we actually could combine those two terms, I have bx minus ax. There's not really any way I can combine those. What I can do, though, is rewrite that. I'm going to factor out an x. And the reason I want to do that, if you think about when you solve an equation, you're done when you say when you have x equals everything else. You have the letter x one time and one time only. So the only way that you can take something like bx minus ax and rewrite that so that the letter x is only written down once is by factoring. Now it's just a simple matter of dividing by b minus a. Now what they showed you here is that you can leave your answer as negative a over b minus a, or we can factor a negative 1 out of the numerator as well as the denominator. And now we have a positive a over a minus b. Those are the same things. Here's another example. 2x over a plus 3 equals x minus 3. Again, we're solving for x, and like similar problems, we have x on both sides of the equation. Now this example introduces a fraction. So the first thing I want to do is unfraction this thing. I don't want the fraction there, so I'm going to multiply both sides by a plus 3. On the left-hand side, the a plus 3 cancels, and I'm left with 2x equals. Now over here, I'm going to distribute, or FOIL, and I'll have ax minus 3a plus a, oh goodness gracious, plus 3x minus 9. Now we've got x over here on the left-hand side, and we have two terms with x on the right-hand side. The idea is still the same. I want x on one side, and I want non-x on the other side. So I'm going to subtract an a and subtract a 3x. And when I do that, I end up with negative ax minus x equals negative 3a minus 9. Now again, I can't combine negative ax and negative 1x other than to factor out my x. So I factor out an x, and now it's just a simple matter of dividing. And like they showed you in previous problems, instead of leaving the answer as negative 3a minus 9 over negative a minus 1, you can change that by factoring out a negative 1 into 3a plus 9 over a plus 1.